Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot onto smooth old stone, into a garden where the night air hums with jasmine, lanterns sway like sleepy fireflies, and tulips tilt their heads as if they've been waiting for you. You're not in some quaint backyard plot. You're inside the empire, Ottoman Istanbul, to be exact, and the flowers here? They're smarter than they look. Their lineage is tracked like royal bloodlines, and one wrong bend in a petal might get someone demoted. Or worse. You probably won't survive this much beauty. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know who else is lying awake in this strange corner of the world with us. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The garden gate clicks behind you, just a polite sound at first, then a bit too final. Beyond it, the Topkapi Palace tulip beds stretch out in perfect lines, glowing faintly under copper lamps. The air smells not just of flowers, but of leather gloves, damp stone, and sweet earth, like someone brewed perfume out of memory. You look down, and the path is paved in patterned tiles, each square hand-painted with a tulip that never existed. You wonder how many gardeners it took to get the real ones right. You crouch near a bloom, deep crimson, tipped with smoky black. It leans slightly toward you. Almost conspiratorially. This isn't your average tulip. This is the work of centuries. See, in the Ottoman world, flowers weren't just decoration. They were theology, politics, art. The tulip, Layl, in Turkish, was the undisputed empress. It had symmetry that hinted at divine perfection, petals that curved like Arabic calligraphy, and a blooming schedule as precise as a military calendar. Sultan after sultan became entranced by them. One even banned public dancing but still commissioned new tulip breeds with names like Tiger's Breath and Hidden Moonlight. Historians still argue whether Sultan Ahmed III's tulip policies were about genuine horticultural passion or just a very fancy distraction from mounting political pressure. Either way, the gardens kept growing, even when the empire strained. As you walk, soft laughter drifts from behind a hedge. Not human laughter. Something lighter, like wind catching fabric. You turn, but there's only a breeze, stirring the petals. You keep moving. Every tulip here has been engineered. Not genetically modified in the modern sense, but bred with religious-level care. Gardeners, called bastanchis, worked in silence, bending over bulbs like monks with dirt under their fingernails. Some cultivated color, others refined curvature, height, stem flex. Rumor has it, one guild developed a mirror system to reflect only certain frequencies of light onto growing plants, attempting to awaken dormant hues. Fringe theory? Absolutely. But at least one mirror shard was found buried in a tulip bed beside notes scrawled in a mix of Arabic, Persian, and Greek. Real Da Vinci Code energy, if he had been more into petals. You reach a small stone platform. In the center stands a copper basin filled with water, and floating inside, a single tulip, jet black and star-shaped. You stare, and it doesn't move. No ripple. No stem. Just hovering in water like a spell holding its breath. You'd ask how they did that, but asking feels rude here. A gardener shuffles past. He's barefoot, silent, carrying a woven tray full of bulbs the size of apricots. His robe is stained with earth and something that smells faintly medicinal, clove, maybe myrrh. He gives you a nod. Not quite friendly. More like, yes, you're here. We knew you'd come. You watch as he kneels beside a raised bed and begins placing bulbs into the soil, one by one, with the same care you'd use to place coins on a lover's closed eyes. The spacing is exact, 3 fingers apart, no more, no less. A soft chant starts up behind you. Not words, more like breathy syllables drawn out like warm taffy. The gardener doesn't flinch. You try not to disturb anything, but the urge to touch one of the petals is overwhelming. You reach for a bloom shaped like a candle flame, golden yellow with a faint blush of pink, just barely. Your fingertip brushes it. It's warm. Not just sun warm. Alive, warm. This is no passive plant. Some historians claim Ottoman tulip breeders talked to their flowers, whispered prayers, played music, even fed them blood-soaked cotton threads during wartime to teach the bulbs courage. Total nonsense, right? Except you just touched one and it felt like it knew your name. You move on. The farther you walk, the more the architecture of the garden shifts. What started as orderly rows now folds into spirals, circles, even mazes, clearly intentional. You recognize a labyrinth pattern from an old Persian manuscript, something tied to mystical numerology. In the middle of it all, a sunken garden ringed with mosaic-tiled benches and silver-leafed olive trees. Their branches sway in unison, though there's no wind. At the center, a tulip grown in a clay vessel shaped like an hourglass. No soil. Just water and what looks like spun silk. The stem splits into two, then rejoins at the flower, forming a perfect loop, an infinity symbol in botanical form. You stare too long. The petals begin to tremble. Not from you. From memory. This is where it begins, the Ottoman obsession. Not just with beauty, but with perfection. With control over nature. With the idea that a flower could be made to mirror the divine. The tulip wasn't chosen by accident. It shared its letters with Allah in Arabic script. It bloomed briefly but brilliantly. It taught impermanence, precision, patience. And unlike roses or jasmine, it didn't smother you with scent. It just existed, distant, perfect, untouchable. You realize you haven't breathed in a while. You exhale. The sound echoes, just slightly. You take one last look around the garden. A lantern flickers. Somewhere, a door closes softly. You're not sure if you entered or exited. Either way, the tulips have noticed you. The soil under your fingertips is richer than it should be. Not just dirt, it's spongy, fragrant, warm. You kneel beside a low wall where a gardener is humming softly, scooping from a carved cedar box. You expect compost. What you get is perfume and something that smells suspiciously like figs. Maybe dates? Maybe both. He glances up, then reaches into the box and offers you a handful. It's moist, dense, flecked with what looks like powdered cinnamon and maybe crushed pearl. You blink. Is this some kind of dessert? Nope. This is tulip food. You hold the mixture in your palm and feel it pulse with heat. It's alive in the way sourdough starters are alive, fermenting quietly, digesting secrets. The Ottomans didn't just feed their flowers manure and mulch. Oh no! They made flower cuisine. Welcome to the underground menu of Ottoman horticulture, a strange, half-alchemical, half-mystical recipe book of growing mediums. Here, tulips didn't thrive on what most would call natural. Instead, they flourished on powdered silk threads, crushed sandalwood, scorched citrus rind, and even dried sea sponge. There's one preserved gardener's list that includes ostrich eggshells, rose ash, and milk from a mooncalf. Scholars still argue whether that last one refers to an actual animal or a euphemism for an especially creamy batch of goat's milk. One thing's clear, Ottoman gardeners weren't winging it. These weren't backyard hobbyists. They were engineers, chemists, and poets. And dirt, to them, wasn't just dirt. It was the interface between heaven and root. A holy buffer zone where transformation happened, if you knew the recipe. You watch as the gardener gently presses the mix into the planting trough. No trowel, just fingers. Always fingers. Then, from a lacquered pouch, he draws out dried petals from an older tulip, crumbled, ancient-looking, like red papyrus, and adds them to the soil. Memory added to memory. A soft bell rings in the distance. That's not a temple bell. That's the compost signal. Yes, really. In the palace gardens, waste was categorized with ritualistic obsession. One kind of organic refuse went to feed fish in decorative ponds. Another went into scented compost piles, rot that smelled like frankincense and clove. Yet another kind, what the palace cookbooks called restful leavings, was fermented with honey and pine ash, then used 4 soulful flowers. Guess which category tulips fell into? The gardeners believed a bulb absorbed the mood of its medium. If you fed a flower melancholy, it would bloom dark and lean inward. If you fed it joy, saffron rinds, crushed sun fruit, and the ashes of joyful letters, it would tilt toward the sun, open early, and sing. Okay, not literally sing. Probably. Historians still argue whether the compost rituals were sincere religious rites, or just performance for the palace elite, an elaborate theater of cultivation. But even skeptics admit this, the flowers responded. With such delicate genetics, tulips are natural divas. Shift a single element, and the entire bloom morphs. That perfect pointed petal? It came from 10 failed generations and a single compost variant that contained powdered coral and, get this, cured eel skin. You move toward a smaller enclosure, where a young apprentice is stirring a bucket with a polished bone ladle. The mixture sloshes like thick milk, flecked with flecks of gold. Literally gold. Flakes of it, suspended in what looks like saffron water. The boy dips a brush and begins painting the roots of young bulbs. Not the petals, not the leaves, the roots. You watch the gold seep in. This was a real thing. Root painting. It wasn't ornamental. The Ottomans believed that a bulb's core, its unseen base, could be taught via symbols. Geometric prayers. Lines mimicking wind. Each stroke had intention. And while there's no direct modern evidence that gold-enriched water does anything beyond bankrupt your gardening budget, some botanists today are kind of intrigued by how certain minerals might affect root communication. Plants, after all, do talk via chemicals and electrical pulses. So, maybe those old gardeners were onto something. You squint at a scroll hung beside the enclosure. It's covered in diagrams, some showing bulb anatomy, others mapping moon phases. One section appears to chart soil emotions over the calendar year. You read, sorrow months, avoid all planting. Joy months, feed with sunlight milk. Below that, there's a pressed flower, perfectly preserved. A tulip the color of dusk. You smell cinnamon again. Nearby, an older gardener is boiling something in a copper kettle. The steam smells like spiced wine and citrus. He drops in a fistful of green moss, then lifts the lid. The mist trails upward into a glass funnel, condensing into dew, which he collects into a stone vial labeled, to awaken sleeping roots. That's the other trick, nothing in the Ottoman garden was wasted. Dew was harvested. Moonlight was bent with mirrors to extend daylight hours without the heat. Water was filtered through marble chips to remove heaviness. One account claims a sultan insisted that only spring water touched by a stork's shadow could be used for his tulips. Wildly specific? Yes. But also, beautifully obsessive. You rest on a low bench and watch the soil brewers at work. Their tools are humble, wooden scoops, silk sieves, sun-bleached measuring lines. But the atmosphere is serious. Sacred, almost. You don't speak. You just breathe it in. The soil is now part silk, part salt, part story. And tomorrow, it will sprout something impossibly precise, something shaped by dreams, superstitions, and the belief that a flower could outlive a dynasty if you fed it just right. You stretch your legs, walking slowly past rows of meticulously labeled tulip beds, each with a carved marker, some in Arabic script, others in pictograms so ornate they look like henna on marble. The air smells faintly of vinegar and crushed mint. It's oddly refreshing. As you pass one bed with deep crimson blooms, a rustling draws your eye to a shaded corner, where a gardener appears to be, whispering. Yep. He's talking to his plants. Not in a cute, grow little buddy kind of way. This is a serious whisper, a low, rhythmic chant under his breath, hands moving in a loop over the petals. You lean closer and catch fragments, blessings, invocations, and maybe a grocery list? No, definitely blessings. This is tulip incantation, and it's not a fringe thing. In the Ottoman gardens, tulips weren't just cultivated, they were courted. They had personalities. Moods. Needs. And yes, sometimes their own poems. One tulip cultivar, called Shabnigger, meaning night's gaze, was said to refuse bloom unless exposed to moonlight and recited a specific verse by Rumi. Historians still argue whether this was actual horticulture or a poetic prank that just got out of hand. Either way, you get the sense that these gardeners weren't simply growing things. They were in relationship with them. A kind of flower-whispering theology. Further down the path, a boy no older than 12 kneels by a row of white tulips. He's holding a mirror, angled carefully to reflect sunlight into the center of each flower. One by one. Slowly. Carefully. You almost laugh, until you realize he's been doing this for hours. His hand is steady, his eyes half-lidded in a meditative trance. Welcome to the Ottoman Light School. There's a whole philosophy behind this. Some tulip varieties were believed to crave specific wavelengths of light, and mirrored glass, carefully hand-polished with beeswax and lavender oil, was used to focus joy into the blooms. Some scholars now theorize this was a way to manipulate blooming patterns subtly without changing the heat exposure, which could be disastrous. Others argue it was nothing more than aesthetic nonsense wrapped in ritual. Still, the results were often spectacular, colors more vivid, petals sharper, symmetry almost uncanny. You crouch by a small plaque etched with stylized tulips and a curious symbol, half sun, half water droplet. This is the emblem of the Gunniseiler, or Sun Watchers, a guild of light-sensitive horticulturists within the palace grounds. They kept diaries tracking how certain tulips responded to the angle of sunrise, the color of dawn, even the shadow patterns cast by clouds. One entry from the 1670s reads, "The violet tongue bloomed in laughter when touched by winter morning. When the clouds wept, it turned its face. When firebirds flew above, it withered." That's probably metaphor. Hopefully. Still, the emphasis on observation was no joke. These gardeners were empirical. Rituals aside, they recorded everything: bloom dates, weather moods, bird migrations, even the sound of the wind. They weren't just growing tulips. They were decoding them. You pause beside a bed of strangely striped tulips, white petals slashed with red in patterns that look almost painted. These are broken tulips, and they're the stuff of legend. In Europe, broken tulips sparked the infamous tulip mania. But in the Ottoman world, they were treated like sacred glitches, beautiful mistakes that whispered secrets. The trick? These patterns came from a virus. A real one. Tulip-breaking virus, as it's now called. It disrupts the pigment cells, causing unexpected color flares. But back then, nobody knew the cause. They just knew that one out of hundreds might suddenly erupt in flame-like swirls, or tiger stripes, or look like someone took a calligraphy pen to a petal. The gardeners called these Rohani Saisekler, spirit flowers. And rather than trying to eliminate the virus, they embraced the unpredictability. In fact, they had a whole separate garden for it, a sanctuary for mutations, watched over by the Sisjasiler, or stripers. Not to be confused with the other kind of strippers. Though, let's face it, these tulips were just as dramatic. The stripers kept logs of which soils, which moon phases, which shadows seemed to spark the most beautiful breaks. Some even intentionally exposed bulbs to unknown composts or pollen dust from the wild north, hoping for magic. There was danger, of course, too much stress, and the bulb could die. But the thrill of coaxing beauty from chaos? Irresistible. You trail your fingers along the edge of a stone basin. It's filled not with water, but with white sand. Each grain glints like powdered pearl. Nestled inside are bulbous roots the size of your thumb, each marked with a ribbon. One gold, one violet, one black. This is the garden of prophecies. Every tulip planted here was born from a mistake. A botched graft. A wilted hybrid. A mismatched pollen swap. And yet, they're the most treasured. Because they taught the gardeners how not to grow, and what might bloom when everything else fails. An older man sits beside the basin, gently brushing sand from a bulb's skin with a swan feather. He hums a song, soft, slow, familiar. You swear you've heard it before. Maybe in a dream. Maybe on a record player. He looks up, nods once, and says, "Some flowers never bloom until they're broken." Chills. You back away slowly, careful not to cast a shadow on the basin. As you return to the main path, you notice something you missed before, a carved inscription over the garden gate, half faded by time and weather. It reads, "Let no hand touch the bloom that does not first greet the root." That might sound like flowery wisdom, but in the Ottoman garden, it was practical. Petals were sacred, yes. But roots were worshipped. You get it now. This wasn't about color or size or fragrance. It was about relationship between soil and star, gardener and flower, intention and accident. And somewhere in that intricate dance, the Ottomans engineered not just perfect tulips, but an entire philosophy of care. You squint into the shadowed alcove beyond the striping garden and find yourself in a far quieter space, still within the walled complex, but somehow muffled, as if the air itself respects the silence. This is the Kokodasi, the root room. Not really a room, more of an open courtyard under a tiled canopy, with benches circling a low central pit filled with soft black earth. This is where tulips go to dream. And yes, you laugh, it sounds ridiculous. But here's the thing, Ottoman tulip breeders didn't just engineer the visible, they engineered the invisible. And the soil? That's where it all began. You crouch by a wooden tray filled with crumbled loam. It's warm. Somehow, a sweet, earthy scent rises from it, notes of fig leaves, fermented rose, and something you can't quite place. Molasses? Camel dung? Could be both. This soil isn't just dirt, it's a recipe. A mixture passed down like sacred scripture from master gardener to apprentice. Historians still argue whether the famed imperial mix actually contained powdered coral or whether that's just another royal embellishment. But one thing is clear, each tulip variety got its own custom blend. Some needed more ash. Some more worm castings. Some, bizarrely, flourished only when the soil had once hosted melon rinds for exactly 3 days. You pick up a dried scroll tucked into a shelf above the soil pit. It's a chart, drawn with ink so fine it looks like hair. Tulip names down one side, soil ingredients down the other. It reads more like a sorcerer's grocery list than a planting manual: ground apricot stones, charred snail shells, powdered goat horn, saffron dust. You start to wonder if this is botany or potion making. A teenaged apprentice enters the courtyard carrying a small amphora, sloshing quietly. He dips a silver ladle and pours its contents into a soil bowl, mixing with careful spirals. You smell citrus, salt, and vinegar. A kind of compost tea, maybe? He doesn't speak. Just nods at the soil like it just passed an exam. Here's the wild bit. The Ottomans believed that soil, once mixed correctly, became alive. Not metaphorically. Really alive. They called it Toamevi, the seed's house. Which makes you wonder what the neighbors were like. But seriously, this belief shaped everything. The soil wasn't passive. It wasn't background. It was the first voice the tulip ever heard. Some gardeners even whispered into the pots while mixing soil, believing their breath helped bind the mixture. Others sang lullabies. Not for the tulip, mind you, for the earth itself. It sounds woo-woo, but it reflects a deep awareness that growing a flower starts long before the bulb even hits the dirt. You look around and notice that each gardener's soil bowl has a slightly different color. Some dark like coffee, some pale as sand. A few shimmer faintly in the light. These weren't accidents. The Ottoman gardeners had a near-obsessive relationship with mineral content. Certain clays, they believed, enhanced brightness. Others deepened blues or softened whites. And here's a mainstream fact that might blow your mind: Sultan Ahmed III, the tulip-mad ruler of the early 18th century, supposedly demanded soil to be imported from as far as Yemen and Anatolia's salt valleys just to satisfy his court's increasingly strange tulip whims. Soil importation, for flowers. Imagine the customs paperwork. One fringe document, part travel journal, part fever dream, mentions a black tulip that only bloomed in a bowl of sand laced with ground lapis lazuli and honey. No proof of this tulip survives, of course. But the story? It keeps popping up in gardener notes and palace letters, like a ghost refusing to leave. The courtyard begins to hum, not literally, but rhythmically. You realize it's the sound of wooden rakes scratching against soil bowls and sink. Left, right, circle, pause. Like a choreographed ritual. And maybe it was. Gardening is prayer. Or science. Or both. Hard to tell the difference here. You touch a nearby ceramic jar labeled Kaffir toppergy, Kaffir soil. You don't even want to guess. But one gardener explained that fermenting the soil using leftover dairy curd created a specific bacterial bloom that made certain tulips lean just slightly to the left when blooming, a tilt considered more pleasing for portrait painters. Historians still debate whether these intentional leans were real or just happy accidents misunderstood by art critics. But dozens of tulip illustrations from the 1720s show that curious swoop, graceful, deliberate, like a polite bow. One poet called it the courtesy of petals. You shake your head, marveling. They didn't just want pretty flowers. They wanted personality, performance, and above all, obedience. The perfect tulip wasn't just symmetrical and colorful. It had to obey. To emerge when coaxed. To bloom with flair. To angle its face just so. To stay in character. Yes, character. And the soil? That was opening night. You rise and dust your hands. The young apprentice nods again as if you've passed some kind of invisible test. Maybe you have. Or maybe he's just being polite. Either way, he points toward a winding staircase carved into the side of the courtyard wall. It disappears upward, into what looks like a loft. You follow, careful not to slip. The scent of soil fades behind you, replaced by something lighter. Fresher. Up there, you're about to see what happens after the soil's perfect. What comes next in the performance of the petal. But not just yet. For now, you take one last glance down at the root room. Bowls of custom soil like sacred offerings. Silent apprentices who move like dancers. A place where dirt gets names, music, and maybe even feelings. It's not gardening. You step into the loft above the root room and pause. A breeze whispers across your cheek, cool, perfumed, faintly metallic, and you realize you've entered the drying gallery. Slatted wooden floors creak beneath your feet. Rows of shallow trays stretch wall to wall, each one layered with what, at first glance, looks like the aftermath of a very polite walnut fight. But no. These are tulip bulbs, dozens, hundreds, some the size of plums, others as tiny as pearls, all laid out like sleeping creatures. Soft papery skins curl around them, bronze and gold and ghostly beige. They look fragile, but these are the engines. The quiet core of the entire obsession. Tulip bulbs don't stay in the soil year-round. That would be far too simple. No, Ottoman gardeners believed that tulip bulbs needed a period of sacred exile, a kind of spa retreat for underground vegetables. Each spring, once the bloom was over and the foliage yellowed, the bulbs were carefully unearthed, dried, and rested. You crouch by a tray marked Leylysergen. The exiled tulip. A poetic name for a bulb too young to bloom. It'll spend this entire season here, just waiting. And here's the kicker, Ottoman botanists believed that without this dry dormancy, the bulb would forget its identity. No chill, no memory. No memory, no flower. Historians still argue whether this belief was based on empirical results or just passed down like superstition with excellent PR. But one thing's certain, they took it seriously. The drying gallery was temperature controlled using vents, shade sails, and water pans placed around the room to balance humidity. It was, in every way, a bulb hospital. A head gardener enters, his robes ink dark and stiff with starch, and checks the trays like a doctor doing rounds. He picks up a single bulb with thumb and forefinger, closes his eyes, and smells it. Not looks. Smells. You're tempted to laugh, until you notice him discard it silently into a bin marked Ezek, bruised. Tulip triage. Mainstream fact here: in some palace records, gardeners were required to catalog every tulip bulb's condition with up to 7 different tags. Not colors, mind you, personalities. Bold, shy, uncertain, finicky. It's unclear how many of these were metaphors and how many were deadly serious. Some fringe letters even describe bulbs being gossiped about behind garden walls. And yes, you're thinking what we're all thinking: were these people okay? But maybe they were just onto something deeper. A tulip doesn't grow like a tree. It doesn't push ever upward. It hides, withdraws, then reappears. It's a drama of vanishing and reappearing. A ritual. And if you miss the timing by even a week, game over. The tulip won't just sulk. It'll vanish. Poof. No bloom next season. One gardener whispers to another about the twins. You lean closer. Apparently, certain bulbs, if split at the wrong time, create clones that bloom in mirror image distortion. Historians still debate whether this was accidental or a deliberate attempt at bulb cloning centuries before modern science. Either way, the results were sometimes spectacular, sometimes monstrous. You turn your attention to a series of curious paper tags attached to each tray. They look handwritten, almost poetic. "See dawn," one says. Like the laugh of a veiled woman. That's not a care instruction, it's a vibe. You realize these tags aren't for logistics. They're descriptions of what the gardener expects the tulip to feel like when it blooms. It's bulb astrology. You glance over a parchment that shows bulb family trees, literal diagrams of tulip lineages. Parent bulbs, offspring bulbs, rogue cousins. The Ottomans didn't just grow flowers. They curated dynasties. A prized tulip like the legendary nightingale's throat could trace its lineage back 7 generations. They tracked ancestry the way modern labs map genomes. A funny tidbit pops into your mind: one court poet wrote a sonnet about a bulb who betrayed its father by blooming in yellow instead of red. A rogue bloom. A scandal. But instead of discarding it, the gardeners named it Siljan Guns, Mad Sun, and started breeding for the trait. Failure wasn't always failure. Sometimes, it was the next big thing. You trail your fingers along a latticework shelf. Up here, drying bulbs get turned every few days with a wooden spoon carved into the shape of a fish. Why a fish? No idea. Maybe the cool metal tips helped balance moisture. Or maybe it was just a superstition. One notebook mentions that spoons shaped like birds led to flighty tulips. Fringe, but oddly consistent. You hear water dripping somewhere, soft and musical. It's coming from a hanging clay funnel, part of the room's passive cooling system. As the water evaporates, it chills the air by a few degrees. Smart. Quiet. Old school engineering. And it means the bulbs never overheat. You imagine them exhaling in tiny invisible sighs of relief. Down the center of the gallery runs a wide beam of dappled sunlight. Not direct sun. Never direct. That would scorch them. No, these are story-like conditions, just enough to whisper to the bulbs, it's not time yet, but soon. You find yourself whispering back, we'll wait. Because that's what this entire section has been about: waiting. Drying. Resetting. Letting the core recharge. The Ottomans understood that sometimes, to make something extraordinary, you have to do absolutely nothing, for months. Just protect, cradle, and believe. The head gardener claps his hands once, soft, respectful, and a bell rings. It's the call for Bakim Zamani, care hour. Time to check every bulb, turn it once, fan the air, whisper a prayer if needed. Not mandatory, but you notice most of the apprentices muttering under their breath anyway. Old habits. You exhale and turn toward a small arched door at the far end of the loft. Beyond it, the next phase awaits. Bulbs don't dry forever. At some point, they must be woken up, coaxed back to life, and told their part in the story is coming. But you linger one more moment. The loft smells like earth, chalk, and faint nutmeg. The bulbs look asleep, but only just. Like actors backstage, half in costume, half in dream. They're ready to bloom. Almost. You slip through the narrow archway at the end of the drying loft and descend a spiral of stone stairs. Your footsteps echo softly, swallowed by the thick walls. As you reach the base, you're met with a long corridor lit by flickering oil lamps, each flame dancing behind colored glass. The air shifts. You're no longer in the drying phase. This is preparation. The liminal space where bulbs transform from dormant nuggets into living promises. Welcome to the potting halls. Rows of low marble tables fill the room, each dusted with fine sand, clay powder, and charcoal. Yes, charcoal. Not for flavor, though the room does smell faintly like the aftermath of a tasteful bonfire. This blend is what the Ottomans called the cephalic charism, or healing mix. A carefully crafted soil cocktail that prevents rot, balances moisture, and, allegedly, encourages bolder bloom colors. Modern horticulturists have tested versions of it. Results? Mixed. But the tradition lives on in gardening circles who insist you must whisper to your compost or it won't respect you. The head gardener, flanked by 2 apprentices, begins the ritual of Wiani's, waking. You watch him reach for a bulb, stroke its flaky skin once, and then nestle it into a small clay pot lined with sheep's wool. Not a joke. The wool holds moisture but keeps direct wetness off the bulb, basically, a tulip mattress. Ottoman comfort standards, even for plants, were sky-high. Next, he gently shakes a thin vial of ash and sprinkles it over the bulb like fairy dust. You lean in. Ash from olive branches, he explains in a hushed tone, used only on bulbs destined for royal courtyards. Why olive? Well, historians still argue whether this had religious symbolism, practical antifungal use, or was simply an elite flex. Either way, the bulb looks positively pampered. You wander over to a corner table and spot something unexpected, rows of small velvet sachets filled with cloves? Cinnamon? A quick sniff confirms it. Fragrant spices. These were sometimes buried near tulip pots to mask odors and, some believe, fool pests with false scents. One theory claims certain spices caused minor genetic mutations, which sounds suspiciously like the tulip version of essential oils on steroids. And here's a quirky tidbit: for the rarest bulbs, gardeners added a droplet of rosewater into the soil mixture, just 1 drop, right before potting. The scent was thought to remind the bulb of paradise. You smirk. Imagine that. Being reborn into soft wool and luxury perfume. Beats most Monday mornings. The potting process is slow, deliberate, and filled with miniature decisions. Which pot for which bulb? How deep? How soon should it see sunlight again? Everything depends on species, lineage, and the mysterious whims of the bulb itself. One gardener lifts a pot to his ear and listens. You catch the side eye from a passing apprentice. Apparently, that's not standard protocol, but then again, who's judging? A mainstream fact now, the Ottomans pioneered a form of staggered forcing, planting the same variety of bulb at different times and under varying conditions to manipulate bloom timing. The goal? A longer tulip season. That meant more weeks of celebration, more poems, more prestige. It also gave them bragging rights when their garden outlasted the one next door. And let's be honest, there's nothing pettier or more poetic than flower-based social warfare. At the far end of the room, sunlight slices through a lattice window, casting intricate shadows on the floor. You follow the pattern to a smaller chamber, where larger containers, almost bathtub-sized, are being filled with the same healing mix. These are for group bloomers, clusters of bulbs meant to bloom together in massive, controlled explosions of color. Picture a firework frozen in mid-burst, only it smells like spring and smug success. One gardener adjusts a line of planted pots by half an inch. Half an inch. You raise an eyebrow, but then recall what he said under his breath earlier: every tulip dreams of symmetry. Again, might be poetic nonsense. Might be ancient science. With these gardeners, it's always both. You bend down and notice an unplanted bulb, still wrapped in its papery tunic. Its tag reads Cavilsum, spark. Someone saved it for last. Maybe it's temperamental. Maybe it's special. One gardener finally picks it up and murmurs, "Patience, Fireheart." He plants it deeper than the others, in its own pot lined not with wool but silk. Silk? This one's royalty. Historians still debate whether this level of customization was widespread or reserved only for the palace elite. Some argue it's all been exaggerated by later romantic accounts. Others point to exhaustive gardening manuals that detail everything down to which direction the bulb should face. No kidding, north-facing bulbs were believed to bloom with cooler colors. South-facing? Richer reds and oranges. A tulip compass, if you will. A small side door opens, and a servant rolls in trays of warm stones wrapped in cloth. Warm stones? You blink. Turns out, for some of the more delicate varieties, warmth after potting helps simulate a faux spring. Think of it as pre-season training for introverted flowers. And yes, it's probably the earliest example of horticultural gaslighting. There's laughter nearby as one apprentice accidentally mixes up a tag and plants a red striped bulb in a pot labeled for whites. Cue mini panic. They correct it, of course, but the incident sparks a round of teasing about the red wedding bloom. You chuckle. Even here, with sacred flowers and centuries of tradition, workplace pranks thrive. Just as you're about to turn away, a new tray is brought in, bulbs from a region called Manisa, nestled in the western hills. You recognize the name from an earlier carving. The Manisa tulips were famous for their unusually narrow petals, almost dagger-like. A fringe theory claims they were bred to mimic Ottoman sabers, blooms of elegance and menace. It sounds like something a bored scribe made up during a particularly dull winter. But then again, the resemblance is uncanny. You watch one last pot get covered, its rim dusted with powdered bark. The gardener hums softly, a tune with no lyrics, no name, just habit passed down in soil-stained hands. The pot is set on a warm shelf, nestled in rows of its siblings. And suddenly, you realize what this is. It's a nursery. Not of children, but of color. Silence. Shape. Patience. Every pot here holds a potential wonder, and not one of them will bloom if rushed. The Ottomans knew that to master nature, you don't conquer it, you court it. Carefully. Consistently. With a dash of cinnamon and maybe a little light flirtation. The air is thick with peat and promise. Somewhere overhead, a bell chimes once. You feel it more than hear it. Time to move. Above this quiet world of soil and song lies the realm of light and geometry, the garden beds themselves. All this pampering is mere prelude to a far bolder stage. And soon, these silent sleepers will rise. But not yet. For now, you tiptoe out, leaving them to their dreams. You push open a creaky wooden gate and are immediately blinded by sunlight. Not metaphorically. No, actual sun, the kind that makes your retinas panic and your shadow slink behind you in protest. The potting halls were a world of soft murmurs and soil. Out here, everything stands bold and bare. And that's by design. Because this is the stage. The royal tulip beds. Your feet crunch against a path of crushed marble dust, so white it glows. The path forks, then forks again, each route bending in sharp, geometric angles. No random curves here. These gardens obey the logic of pattern. An Ottoman principle called tezhip, ornamental symmetry borrowed from manuscript art and applied to actual dirt. And it's mesmerizing. You've officially entered the OCD section of paradise. Each flower bed is raised slightly, like a tray offered to the sky. Framed in hand-carved cedar, filled with that now familiar wool-laced soil blend, and shaped with terrifying precision. Squares. Stars. Interlocking octagons. Some beds are split in half diagonally, as if caught mid-thought. And then, the tulips. Just beginning to wake. Tiny green spears poke up like sleepy arrows, their tips blushing at the sun. You pass one bed where every bulb was planted at the exact same depth. Their little heads rise in perfect unison. It's spooky. A tulip cult, led by the head gardener with his ladle of rosewater. He's here, by the way, inspecting the bloom beds with a measuring stick. Not metaphorical again, an actual stick. Wooden, carved with finger-width increments. He crouches, measures the distance between sprouts, mutters something in Turkish, and scribbles a note in his garden log. If a bulb is strayed by more than a thumb's breadth, it will be replanted. No second chances. No free-range tulips in this monarchy. You step onto a side path shaded by grapevines. Overhead, linen cloths flutter between wooden poles, offering partial shade to a more delicate bed. These are the early bloomers, reds and pale pinks meant to tease the season. Their petals unfurl faster under warmth and partial light. Legend says they used to bloom first for the Sultan's daughters, who would name each one like pets. According to one fringe account, a certain Miss Petalbottom even had her own terrarium. Historians strongly suspect exaggeration, but nobody's ready to rule it out. And here's your mainstream fact: the Ottomans didn't just arrange tulips for beauty, they scheduled them. Every variety had a designated week. Think of it as floral programming. You don't just want tulips, you want the drama of tulips. Whites bloom softly in week 1, like snowfall in spring. By week 4, you're in full red inferno, with orange streaks and jagged flames. The final weeks? Deep purple and almost black tulips, dramatic as closing credits. You get the sense they'd have used confetti if it didn't interfere with drainage. That's the thing, the beds aren't just decorative. They're designed for surveillance. Raised edges make it easier to spot slouching leaves. Slanted walkways drain excess water away from roots. Even the air circulation is considered. You pause beside a low wall carved with tulip motifs, noticing tiny slots near the base. Wind vents. They pull warm air away from the soil when needed. It's not gardening. It's horticultural engineering. You wander past a gardener who's talking to a row of still dormant bulbs. Not whispering, full sentences. You catch, "You lazy lot better make me proud this year." A passing boy brings him a tin tray with honey and almonds. Snack time. You realize this man has worked these beds for decades and still treats each tulip like it might judge him if it doesn't bloom just right. And he's probably correct. At the center of the garden lies the Saturvan, a marble fountain burbling softly under an open dome. You dip your fingers in. The water is cold, mineral-rich, and entirely non-potable unless you enjoy gastrointestinal roulette. But the tulips love it. It's used for mid-season watering, once the soil begins to tighten. There's a method to it, of course. One gardener explains that water is poured not directly at the stem, but in a spiral motion around the bulb's base. Why? It awakens the root's curiosity, he says with a wink. Science or superstition? Historians still argue whether spiral watering improves uptake or was just an excuse to look extra mystical. And it does look mystical. Especially now, with birds chirping overhead and petals beginning to catch the afternoon light. One crimson tulip has already opened, just slightly, like a yawn. You lean in and notice the pattern, white specks near the edges, as if someone shook sugar over it while distracted. That speckling isn't random, by the way. It's prized. Called cartonisi, snowflakes. And sometimes, it's caused by a mild virus. That's right. The most beautiful tulips were often sick. Not dying, just fancy with symptoms. And the Ottomans adored them for it. You walk further into a quieter section, more secluded. These beds are smaller, protected by latticed walls. Here grow the anomaly tulips, the freaks, the rebels, the mutations. Spots. Stripes. Petal splits. One flower has a double bloom, like it cloned its face. These are not for public display. They're experiments. A reminder that perfection can be messy behind the scenes. Like your high school yearbook photo, but with more pollen. A gardener here is sketching blooms into a book, murmuring notes about color gradients. He stops, frowns, and wipes off the last mark with a damp cloth. No pencils allowed. Every record is in ink, but the sketchbook? That's the exception. Ink is truth, he says. But pencil allows for hope. You nod solemnly, pretending you understand. Meanwhile, you mentally add floral philosopher to this man's CV. As the sun begins to dip slightly, the colors sharpen. Pink turns rose, yellow edges toward gold. The beds seem to glow, and for a moment, you understand why sultans commission entire poems, feasts, and banquets around tulip season. Because this isn't gardening. It's theater. Every bed a stage. Every bulb an actor waiting for the cue. Just as you start to relax, a low whistle pierces the air. A line of gardeners begins sweeping through the beds with small brushes, yes, brushes, clearing dust and repositioning pebbles. Even the dirt here gets groomed. One slips and drops a watering can, spilling a bit too close to a just emerging tulip. He looks genuinely devastated. His friend pats his shoulder and mutters, maybe it likes a little chaos. You look around and realize, for all the rules, rituals, and obsessive precision, there's still a heartbeat of wildness here. Something ancient and defiant in every root. That night, many of these tulips will sleep under muslin covers, like tucked-in children. Just enough warmth to keep them from shivering. But before that, before the fans are turned off and the lanterns dim, you pause by one final bed. A single bulb, planted at the center, already in bloom. Deep violet, nearly black. Its petals curve inward, not out. A moody diva. And hanging from its stake is a silk tag embroidered with one word, Anupma. Don't forget. You won't. You leave the tulip beds behind, stepping through a narrow doorway into a cool, shadowed chamber where the air feels heavier, richer with secrets and stories. This is the hazine, the treasury, but not of gold or jewels. Instead, you find yourself surrounded by rows of wooden crates and woven baskets, all carefully labeled with faded ink and tied shut with hemp twine. Inside these containers lie the real treasures of the tulip world, the bulbs themselves, preserved, catalogued, and guarded like priceless relics. As you wander past the stacks, a pungent, earthy scent rises, a mixture of dried soil, aged wood, and something slightly sweet, like a forgotten spice. It's almost intoxicating. You inhale deeply, and for a moment, imagine you're inhaling centuries of Ottoman horticultural passion. A worker nearby chuckles and warns you not to get too carried away, that smell has been known to cause flower fever. This storage wasn't just practical, it was ritualized. The Ottomans believed that tulip bulbs were vessels of life, and their care and dormancy was just as important as their blooming. They used layers of straw, charcoal dust, and cedar chips to protect the bulbs from dampness and pests, ancient pest control that was, in some ways, more advanced than modern methods. You notice a few tiny holes in the wooden crates, cleverly designed for airflow but small enough to keep out hungry insects. A little engineering magic mixed with old wisdom. One quirky fact stands out here: some tulip enthusiasts sprinkled crushed coral powder among the stored bulbs, thinking the minerals would strengthen the bulb's spiritual core. Coral powder? It sounds like an alchemist's prank, but it was a genuine Ottoman practice, though historians still argue whether it had any actual botanical effect or was purely symbolic. While you're absorbed in this botanical vault, a young apprentice approaches, carefully carrying a small box wrapped in silk. He opens it to reveal a collection of the rarest bulbs, each shaped like a tiny pearl, luminescent under the dim light. These are the moon tulips, a legendary variety said to bloom only under a full moon's light and to glow faintly in the dark. Of course, scientists today remain skeptical, debating if these were merely folklore or a misunderstood optical illusion caused by certain fungal infections. Your eyes linger on the moon tulips, imagining their ethereal glow. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you recall tales of Ottoman poets who composed entire verses inspired by such mysterious flowers, claiming their beauty transcended the earthly realm. The bulbs, however, remain inert for now, cocooned in their silk nests, waiting patiently for their moment. Beyond the moon tulips, you spot a ledger lying open on a table. It's filled with handwritten notes, sketches, and charts, all cataloging the lineage of each tulip bulb. This system of botanical record keeping was advanced for its time, allowing gardeners to track traits, crossbreed selectively, and avoid mistakes that might dull the vibrancy of a bloom. It's Ottoman genetics in its earliest form, a living library of tulip heredity. And here's the kicker: some bulbs were kept for decades, passed down through generations of gardeners. Think about that. A bulb outliving its caretakers, preserved with the hope that future hands might coax it into glory. You wonder if any of these bulbs whispered secrets as they waited, or if their dormant state was a kind of deep sleep, dreaming of colors yet unseen. A historian might argue whether this intense cataloging was standard or exclusive to palace gardens. The debate continues, as some Ottoman provincial gardens seem to have followed less rigorous methods, favoring spontaneity over system. Yet, in the imperial heartland, tulip care was nothing less than meticulous. The room hums with quiet reverence, a silent testament to the patience and dedication woven through every stage of tulip cultivation. It's clear, the Ottomans didn't just grow flowers, they cultivated hope, beauty, and a legacy rooted deep in the soil and time. You take one last look at the crates and baskets, at the quiet promise they hold, before stepping back into the light. Outside, the garden calls again, blooming and waiting for you to witness its unfolding story. You slip out of the shadowed hazine and back into the sunlight, where the garden hums with quiet life. But now you're headed to a different kind of oasis, one filled with tools, powders, and a little bit of mystery. The tulip laboratory, tucked away behind a lattice wall, feels more like an alchemist's den than a gardener's shed. Inside, shelves groan under the weight of glass jars filled with vibrant pigments, powders ground from minerals, and strange-smelling concoctions. You spot pots of crushed coral, dried pomegranate rinds, and even bottles of rosewater imported from distant lands. This was no ordinary garden shed. It was a laboratory of color and scent, where gardeners and chemists worked hand in hand. You watch as a gardener mixes a paste from powdered clay and tulip petals, explaining in a low voice that these pastes were applied to the flower stems to encourage specific color changes. It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, but the Ottomans were pioneers in botanical experimentation. They believed that manipulating a tulip's environment could change its patterning, much like how a painter adjusts a canvas. One odd detail catches your eye, a small jar labeled crocodile dung extract. You blink, wondering if you misread it. Nope. Apparently, this was a secret Ottoman fertilizer, rumored to be rich in nitrogen and believed to promote vibrant color. Whether it worked or just smelled terrible remains part of the ongoing scholarly debate. You try not to imagine how it was harvested. The gardener invites you closer to observe a delicate process called budding, where pollen is carefully transferred from one tulip to another using a tiny brush. It's painstaking work, requiring a steady hand and immense patience. The goal? To engineer the perfect broken tulip, a flower streaked with unpredictable flames and stripes caused by a virus called the tulip breaking virus. Here's the twist: while the virus disfigured the tulip, it made it more valuable. The flamboyant patterns were considered exotic and desirable, sparking what historians call tulip mania. The Ottoman gardeners were both caretakers and accidental promoters of this viral infection, blurring the line between natural beauty and cultivated chaos. You also learn that there were secret competitions among palace gardeners to create the most stunning new varieties. These contests were intense, with rewards including titles, riches, and even rare silk robes. Gardeners who failed might be reassigned to less prestigious duties, or worse, sent to prune the ever-demanding rose bushes. Historians still debate how much the virus was deliberately spread. Was it a calculated risk, a kind of botanical gambling? Or was it a happy accident that became a craze? The mystery lingers like the scent of rosewater in the air. You watch as the gardener dips a brush into a jar of pollen, steadies his hand, and delicately paints a petal. It's a dance between science and art, control and chance, order and wild beauty, a paradox at the heart of Ottoman tulip culture. Outside, the garden awaits, its petals ready to tell the next chapter of a story written in soil, sunlight, and the slow, steady art of engineering perfection. You wander from the laboratory into a quieter corner of the garden, where a small pavilion stands surrounded by low hedges trimmed to geometric perfection. This is the meeting place of the tulip connoisseurs, poets, courtiers, and gardeners alike, who gather to celebrate the flower in all its glory and mystery. It smells faintly of burning amber and spiced tea, a fragrance that seems to wrap the air like a gentle embrace. You settle on a cushioned divan, the silk fabric cool against your skin, as a soft breeze stirs the heavy drapes. Around you, the elite discuss tulips not as plants, but as symbols of wealth, status, and fleeting beauty. One older gentleman recites verses from a famous Ottoman poet who likened the tulip to a beautiful woman who is both delicate and dangerous. You catch a whisper that tulip fever wasn't just about flowers, it was about desire, obsession, and the intoxicating allure of perfection. And here's a mainstream fact: by the early 17th century, tulips had become a cultural phenomenon in Istanbul, inspiring everything from fashion to ceramics. The period even earned the nickname Lale Devri, or Tulip Era, marked by a brief flowering of arts and leisure. It's like a floral renaissance, but with more petals and fewer velvet cloaks. One of the more unusual customs you overhear is a game where participants blindfold themselves and attempt to identify tulip varieties by scent alone. You imagine how challenging that must be, especially when some scents are subtle, blending hints of honey, mint, or even a faint whiff of leather. This sensory game adds a playful, human touch to an otherwise exacting world of horticultural precision. You learn that tulip-inspired textiles were all the rage, with patterns mimicking the flame-like streaks caused by the tulip breaking virus. Tailors crafted robes and kaftans with embroidered tulips swirling like flames, making wearers look like walking, talking bouquets. A fringe theory suggests that this fashion was a subtle political statement, representing the tension between order and chaos that the tulip's beauty embodied. Historians still debate whether the tulip craze was primarily driven by court elites or if it truly permeated all layers of Ottoman society. Some argue it was an aristocratic indulgence, while others point to markets and festivals where ordinary citizens embraced tulips with equal passion. As the sun sets, the group begins a toast, raising small glasses of rose-scented sherbet. You join in, the sweet liquid cooling your throat and adding a hint of floral sparkle to the evening. Around you, laughter bubbles like a gentle stream, stories intertwine with poetry, and the garden glows softly under lantern light. For a moment, you forget the world outside this garden, the politics, the wars, the endless push and pull of empire. Here, in this space suspended between earth and sky, you glimpse the Ottoman tulip not just as a flower, but as a living symbol of a society's quest for beauty, meaning, and fleeting perfection. You lean back, letting the warm glow settle in, knowing that tomorrow's blooms will carry on this delicate dance of nature and human hands. You drift from the pavilion's laughter and light, stepping toward the outer gardens where the soil is richer and the air hums with quiet activity. Here, the tulip growers work through the night, tending to their beloved flowers by moonlight. The Ottomans believed the moon's gentle glow encouraged growth and helped set the petals' fiery patterns, a belief mingling science with superstition that still captivates. You notice gardeners moving with deliberate calm, their hands deftly pruning, tying, and examining each bloom. They work with lanterns hanging low, casting long shadows on the ground, creating an almost mystical atmosphere. One gardener tells you about the tradition of night harvesting, where tulips were picked before dawn to preserve their freshest scent and vibrant colors, a practice that also helped prevent damage from midday heat. Here's a historical fact: Ottoman gardeners developed a sophisticated calendar tied to lunar cycles and seasonal changes, guiding every aspect of tulip cultivation. This agricultural rhythm was intertwined with religious festivals and court ceremonies, demonstrating how deeply the tulip was woven into Ottoman life. You realize these gardeners weren't just plant keepers, they were timekeepers, too. In a quiet corner, you observe an intriguing ritual, a gardener gently rubbing crushed pearl powder onto the leaves of a particularly delicate tulip. This peculiar practice was believed to strengthen the petals and enhance their luster, a curious blend of horticulture and alchemy. While modern science doubts pearl powder's botanical effects, it remains a fascinating example of Ottoman experimental techniques. The night air carries a faint scent of jasmine and damp earth, and as you watch, you catch sight of a rare event, a tulip's petals slowly unfurling in the moonlight, revealing the telltale broken streaks of the tulip breaking virus. Despite its destructive nature, this virus was prized for producing the most breathtaking, unpredictable patterns. The gardener's willingness to embrace such a contradiction speaks volumes about their relationship with nature. A fringe detail comes into view. Some growers used a secret blend of crushed snake skin and herbal oils as a deterrent against pests. You raise an eyebrow, imagining how many of these odd remedies were passed down through whispered advice and carefully guarded notebooks. Scholars still debate how much these folk treatments actually contributed to tulip health versus simply reflecting superstition. As the first hint of dawn colors the horizon, you notice that some bulbs are being carefully dug up and replanted, part of a cycle designed to maintain soil fertility and bulb vitality. This process, akin to crop rotation, was surprisingly advanced and showed the Ottomans' understanding of sustainable gardening long before it became a buzzword. The night fades into morning, and you feel the hum of the garden's life pulse stronger with the sun's return. Tulips, nurtured by moon and earth, are ready to greet the day in a blaze of colors, nature's perfect engineering, shaped by centuries of human hands, belief, and care. You follow a winding path toward the heart of the tulip fields, where rows upon rows of blossoms stretch like a painter's palette laid bare. The colors shift under the morning sun, crimson flames, soft pinks, bright yellows, each petal telling a story of meticulous selection and secret knowledge passed down through generations. Here, the Ottomans' mastery of hybridization comes alive. Gardeners experiment by cross-pollinating varieties, hoping to capture the elusive perfect bloom, a tulip with vibrant color, balanced flame patterns, and sturdy stems. This wasn't luck, it was a science in the making, blending observation with patience and trial. One popular technique involved planting bulbs in specific arrangements to encourage natural crossbreeding. Rows were sometimes staggered by height or spaced in patterns to maximize pollen spread by bees and wind. You watch a gardener releasing a swarm of carefully tended bees, nature's unwitting collaborators in the quest for floral perfection. A fascinating fact emerges: the Ottomans kept detailed records of their breeding experiments, noting not just outcomes but environmental factors like soil composition and humidity. These proto-scientific journals show a surprising sophistication in early botanical research. Yet, historians still argue about how widespread and standardized these practices really were beyond the palace gardens. You catch a glimpse of an unusual bulb, twisted, gnarled, but blooming with an unexpected elegance. This is a parrot tulip, named for its feather-like petals and flamboyant colors. Interestingly, this variety thrived despite being prone to viral infections, reinforcing the complex balance between beauty and biological fragility that Ottoman gardeners embraced. On a whim, you sample a tulip petal, safe, they assure you, and it tastes faintly sweet with a hint of bitterness, a sensory reminder of how deeply intertwined the tulip was with daily life. Some Ottomans even used petals to flavor teas or decorate special dishes during festive occasions, elevating the flower from mere ornament to culinary delight. You also learn about the famed tulip parades, seasonal celebrations where growers displayed their newest and most prized varieties. These festivals combined artistry, competition, and community bonding, transforming the humble bulb into a social spectacle. Yet, a fringe theory proposes that these events also masked deeper political tensions, using the tulip's fragile beauty as a metaphor for imperial power's fleeting nature. As you stroll through this riot of color, you realize the tulip was never just a flower here. It was a canvas, a currency, a conversation between nature and culture, scientific curiosity and artistic flair. Each bloom is a testament to centuries of dedication, a living masterpiece engineered by human hands, dreams, and a little bit of wild magic. The garden hums softly around you, alive with the promise of new discoveries and blooms yet to come. The sun climbs higher as you enter a shaded alcove filled with gentle whispers, the voices of artisans and craftsmen who turned tulips into objects of desire beyond the garden. This was the realm where nature met human creativity, and the tulip's influence blossomed into textiles, ceramics, calligraphy, and even architecture. You run your fingers over the delicate silk of a caftan embroidered with flame-patterned tulips, the thread shimmering like liquid fire. Ottoman tailors were masters of translating the tulip's fiery streaks into fabric, creating garments that seemed to breathe with the flower's energy. Wearing one of these robes was not just a fashion statement, it was an embodiment of status, taste, and the ephemeral beauty tulips represented. In a nearby workshop, artisans mold clay into elegant tulip-shaped lamps and bowls, their designs echoing the curves and colors of the blossoms outside. These ceramics became prized items, both decorative and functional, gracing the homes of nobles and merchants. You spot a quirky detail: some tulip vases are glazed with a rare blue pigment derived from crushed lapis lazuli, a costly mineral imported from Afghanistan. Imagine the extravagance of pouring water into a vessel that cost more than most houses. A mainstream fact shines through: tulip motifs were widespread in Ottoman art and design during the 17th century, symbolizing paradise, renewal, and the fleeting nature of life. They adorned everything from palace tiles to manuscript illuminations, reinforcing the tulip's deep cultural resonance. Yet, historians still debate whether the tulip's symbolic role was purely aesthetic or if it held religious significance, subtly woven into Ottoman spirituality. You overhear a storyteller reciting verses where the tulip is compared to a lover's beauty, fickle, radiant, and heartbreakingly brief. This poetic tradition shows how the flower inspired more than horticulture; it became a metaphor for life's delicate balance between joy and sorrow. One fringe theory suggests that tulip motifs were a form of coded communication among the elite, secret messages hidden in patterns that hinted at political alliances or dissent. It sounds like something from a spy novel, but the idea fascinates you nonetheless. As the day warms, you imagine the soft rustle of silk, the clinking of ceramic cups, and the whispered verses mingling with the scent of fresh tulips. This confluence of art and nature, science and culture, reveals how deeply the tulip's influence penetrated Ottoman life. You step outside, carrying the weight of centuries of craftsmanship and dreams, ready to see the garden's final chapters unfold. You step back into the garden's vast expanse, but the atmosphere shifts now. Here, the tulip's story entwines with the city's pulse and the empire's changing tides. The gardens, once tranquil havens, have become stages for politics, power, and public spectacle, reflecting the empire's ambitions and anxieties. You find yourself among bustling crowds gathered for the annual Tulip Festival, a dazzling display where commoners and elites mingle beneath floral arches. The air buzzes with excitement, mingling the sweet scent of tulips with street food spices and the murmur of negotiations and gossip. This was more than a festival; it was a social performance, a chance to see and be seen. One mainstream fact anchors this scene: the tulip era, roughly 1718 to 1730, was a period of relative peace and cultural flourishing in the Ottoman Empire, but also marked by extravagant spending and political intrigue. The tulip became a symbol of luxury and excess, a floral mirror to the empire's fragile balance. In a corner, you spot a vendor selling tulip-shaped pastries glazed with honey and pistachio, a sweet echo of the flower's delicate beauty. You take a bite, the flavors rich and unexpected, and you realize that tulips even inspired cuisine, blending the visual and gustatory senses. A curious detail emerges: some festival-goers wore masks decorated with tulip patterns, turning the celebration into a carnival of identity and disguise. This playful masquerade hints at deeper social tensions, where appearances could deceive, and beauty was both celebrated and weaponized. Historians still argue whether the tulip era's cultural vibrancy masked underlying instability that eventually led to political upheaval. Was the tulip a hopeful symbol of renewal or a fragile ornament destined to shatter? The question lingers as you watch the crowd sway between joy and unease. You overhear whispers of a rebellion sparked partly by resentment toward the lavish spending on tulips while the common people struggled, a reminder that beauty often comes with a cost. The tulip, for all its charm, was entangled in a web of empire, economy, and inequality. As dusk falls, lanterns flicker to life, casting tulip-shaped shadows on the cobblestones. The festival's glow feels both magical and fleeting, like the flower itself, brilliant, intoxicating, and all too brief. You take a deep breath, savoring this moment where history's blooms seem to pulse with life, before the inevitable fade. You wander now toward the garden's quiet edge, where the tulips begin to thin and the sounds of the city soften into a distant hum. It's a place of reflection, where the legacy of these remarkable flowers settles like morning mist, lingering long after the petals have fallen. You think back over everything, the passionate gardeners who coaxed perfection from the earth, the poets and artists who celebrated tulips as emblems of beauty and desire, the festivals where blooms became symbols of empire and aspiration. The tulip's journey in the Ottoman world is a tale of nature and culture entwined, a delicate dance of science, superstition, art, and power. A historical fact grounds you here. By the late 18th century, the tulip craze had waned, overtaken by political upheavals and shifting tastes, yet the flower's influence endured, inspiring gardens, art, and stories far beyond Ottoman borders. You catch a whisper of a fringe theory, that some tulip varieties carried genetic secrets lost to time, hidden codes in their fiery patterns waiting to be rediscovered. Whether true or myth, it adds a touch of mystery to the flower's final act. Historians still debate the extent to which the tulip's rise and fall mirrored the Ottoman Empire's fortunes. Was the flower a hopeful symbol of renewal or a delicate harbinger of decline? Perhaps it was both, a reminder that beauty and impermanence are forever intertwined. As you sit quietly among the last blooms, the garden seems to breathe with a gentle sigh. The air carries the faintest scent of petals past, mingling with earth and memory. You realize that, in the end, the tulip is more than a flower, it's a story, a dream, and a whisper carried on the wind. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The garden grows still as twilight deepens, the vibrant colors softening into shades of dusk. You feel a gentle calm settle over you, like a warm blanket wrapping around your shoulders, as the stories of the Ottoman tulip drift slowly into memory. The flowers you saw today, their fiery petals and delicate curves, fade softly into the background of your mind, like a lullaby hummed by the earth itself. Each tulip, with its brief but brilliant life, reminds you of the fragile beauty in our own moments, the way light shifts and changes, the way time carries us all forward. There's a quiet magic in this, a soothing truth that even the most fleeting things leave traces that linger, shaping the world in ways unseen. So, breathe deeply now. Feel the softness of the night air, the gentle pulse of the garden's heart, and know that this story, like the tulips, lives on quietly within you. Let your thoughts drift like petals on a gentle breeze, carrying you toward rest and renewal. Good night, and may your dreams bloom as brightly as the perfect tulip.